I'd like to continue on with my story about language loss. Of course, we know that in the residential schools, um, my parents were punished for speaking their language. That was their only language that they knew prior to going into residential school, and were expected to understand, communicate with the nuns and their caretakers in another language that was foreign to them. And anytime that they used their language and practiced any other culture, they were punished for these um, these infractions. And so that whole experience was a very negative experience for our people, and that's to put it lightly, because it basically, to put it truthfully, it was genocide. When you take away a person's identity and their way of knowing and their language, way of communicating, you're taking away their whole being, their spirit, and therefore, it was to take the Indian out of the child, and that is an act of genocide for Canadian people, not people, but the government. It was an act from the government, and as a result, my grandparents, they've learned very little English. I know that my grandfather said he went in there from age 5, came out at age 16, and only knowing how to write and read up to grade 3. And so most of the time they were used as labor for the residential school to keep things running, looking after cattle, farming, and whatnot. And so they learned very little English, and were felt badly about their own identity and their language, and so therefore they internalized this language. Some internalized that, it's called internalized racism, when they feel badly about their own identity, about their own language. And so some of them felt they didn't want to pass on their language. They didn't want to pass on their culture to their children because they might not succeed in 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 um, in the society, outside world. And some people, like my grandfather, was very angry when he came out of residential school. He did not want to have his children put in residential school, but they still had to, because they would be arrested if their children weren't in school. Their stories are so numerous around that part of our history. But he was angry, and he wanted to make sure his grandchildren would never go to residential school. He was he wanted to make sure that um, we spoke our language. He wanted to make sure that we understood who we are, what our spirituality was, and I'm so grateful for that, because like I said, only 20% of my people, my age, can speak language fluently. And just now realizing, wow, we have such a rich culture. We need to share this with our children, but we don't know where to go. We don't know where to go and find language and culture. Some people do. They have the avenues right there in their communities, such as going to the different ceremonies that are going on right now in the spring. And so we do have some people that know, and then some people that are don't know how to go about it. And so um, it's a whole, like I said, we have to work at it as a community as to how we're going to get back our language. And so in saying that I was how I'm a result of my ancestors' prayers. um, they would take us to the ceremonies, and they would have us prayed upon. Little children, 8 years old, 9 years old, we'd be sitting there, and they would be, giving and asking for prayers for us. And this is what happened is we are a result of those prayers, that I can still speak my language. I can still teach my language to whoever wants to learn it. And and so because of my grandfather's uh, experience and switching it so that we would only, after school when we got home, because I wasn't raised by my mom, I was raised by my grandparents. And so when we would get home from school, it would be speak Cree only. You can only speak Cree when you're in this in at home, kind of like immersion. And so therefore the kind of Cree we spoke was like basic everyday language that we needed to get by with each other as a family, such as, you know, doing chores, um, taking care of ourselves to get ready for school. All these things were spoken in Cree. And even the weather, my grandma would look out the weather and she'd say, "Oh, it's windy, it's a little bit cold, the wind is blowing the smoke this way," and we get to hear the weather lore every morning, just by her the little stories that they told amongst each other, my grandparents. And they would prepare us for the day by looking outside the window and getting looking at nature, and see what the nature how what we could learn from nature outside, how to dress properly, all those things that we did to live off the land. That's those are the kinds of things that we learned at home. They gave us my grandfather believed that education was important for us to learn the cunning of the white man, which it was is what it says in the treaty. To learn education is to learn the cunning of the white man, which means that we need to know our rights. We need to be able to read documents. We need to be able to read law, the treaties, so we understand what our rights are, and so we'd be able to stand up for ourselves as Indigenous people. And so we've got both kinds of teachings in the home. Uh, Entertainment was done in Cree, like um, the games that we played. Like as soon as he would walk in, he would turn the TV off and say, "Okay, we're going to do this now. We're going to he's going to tell us legends, or he's going to initiate a game, or to sing a song." Like I know in summer times he wouldn't let me sleep in. He'd come and sit at the foot of the bed and start singing his song, whatever it was. And who can sleep with that kind of noise going on? And but that was his way of waking us up in a positive way in our culture. And so that was his purpose. That was his life purpose, was to make sure that we didn't experience what he experienced. Um, so at home, he switched it up so that we would learn language and culture at home. And but then there was also racism that we had to deal with outside when we went to school, which brought down our self-esteem. Man, it was terrible. And I know a lot of people would share those kind of same stories wherever you go, whether it's Pine Ridge or if it's Cut Knife, you know. It was, it made you feel this big, and it made you feel ashamed of they made you I don't know, they can't make you feel anyway, but if you're being bullied, you're gonna feel maybe they're right, you know. I don't know, but anyways, it was not a very good experience, being in an integrated school. And so in terms of our language, we want to speak English rather than speak Cree, so that we could fit in. And that's that internalized racism coming out again. I wouldn't say it was a internalized racism. It was more or less to survive, so we wouldn't get teased for our accent and the way we spoke our language. So these are all things that lead up to losing language, but also how we turn that around, and we see the beauty in our own culture. We see the beauty in the sound of our own language. For example, our language is based on our environment. The sounds that we make are similar to the kinds of things you would hear, like the water going by, or else the trees, people moving, things clicking, clanging. That's like how our language sounds like. And if you get into tune with that, you'll be able to hear the different kind of sounds that we use in speaking Cree. And and also in our so when we're learning language, we're not just learning sounds and items like objects. We're not just learning these different names of these objects. We're also learning the deeper meaning of those objects and what that how that connects us to nature. And that'll be the next video that I will do, is how how the language connects us to nature and our identity.